Deep canvassing. I think this quote was from Saturday, wasn't it?
I think so.
I think on this last Saturday on the podcast, Howie was asked about deep canvassing, and he said, "Do more listening than preaching." Deep canvassing is about having long, repeated conversations with voters to build trust and good relationships that may eventually shift their opinions if they don't initially agree. Research shows that brief door to door canvassing had nearly zero effect on voting choices. However, deep canvassing does have measurable effects. In particular, one study showed that 10-minute conversations did have an effect in reducing transphobia among residents. It's far more effective than other forms of outreach, such as mailers, flyers, speeches and rallies. Um, Tips on deep canvassing: there has to be more than one encounter. In electoral politics, it's talked about as touches, right? You need 6 to 12 touches to turn
Mhm.
someone into a voter. Um, but deep canvassing is going beyond a touch, right? It's an actual engagement. Repeated contact and check-ins. This means you got to start way early if you're trying to, mobilize this for an election day. Listen to concerns and try to relate those concerns to your platform. Don't put the voter on the spot with leading questions. Ask what their concerns are, and over time, make small asks and move folks up the ladders of engagement. Right. So this is one way you can develop people up the ladders as well. Um, the really important thing here, I think, and it goes straight to Howie's quote: listen to concerns and try to relate those concerns to your platform. Right. Um, when we're talking about something like Howie's eco-socialist Green New Deal, um, what climate crisis looks like, what environmental racism looks like, what air pollution looks like in its sources is very unique to each location. And so we as organizers have to be very skilled at listening, actively listening, and hearing what the concerns that people are talking about on the very micro local level,
Mhm.
and helping expand them out, right? Because earlier I talked about negative globalization, the pressure of individual, and it's the idea of if we all bought electric cars, we'd solve the climate crisis. No, we wouldn't. 70 of the, 100 companies would still cause 70% of it, or of emissions, right? So in order to get like past that, or help people kind of understand the process of you know realizing these changes in problems that are global and systemic, um, you've got to be able to take that initial manifestation of climate change, right, and then relate it up. So that's your job as the organizer, not to tell them what solutions there are, but to listen to what they have to say, to make connections to the larger, crises that we're dealing with, and then connecting into your organization as a vehicle for change, right? And I'll
Mhm.
say from, knocking those doors, working class communities are, and I come from a county of 5,000 with one stoplight, right? So I know rural communities too. These working class communities, whether they're urban or rural, are ready for a new path,
Mhm.
but they're bullshit detectors on high alert because
Right.
they've been lied to a lot, right? So you've got to have repeated conversations, and then, like it says here, as you build the relationship, you start asking real small asks, right? Little things, and build it up. And you'll meet someone that goes from 0 to 60, right? But
Mhm.
most people you're gonna have to slowly throttle up. I had somebody from that neighborhood where we did the cleanup. He was an 80-year-old man, and there were weekly meet the mayor events. So we took him to one, and he lived on the east side of my town, which is the working class and black side of town. And so we're sitting there, and the city had used TIF money on Capitol Avenue, which goes from the Capitol and heads east. And they used TIF money to put a roundabout in. And so me and this 80-year-old black man sit in the rich white mayor's office, and he said, "So why did you build the roundabout so that people would never have to see the black east side? They could leave the Capitol and just loop straight back into the downtown." And we got thrown out. right? And I wasn't sure how he was going to respond. And we're walking out, and he goes, "When's the next one? We're going next time." Right? And so you make these small asks. Um, the working class, doesn't need to be told about these things. They experience and live under capitalism, under climate change, under sexism, racism, transphobia, homophobia, all of it. They experience all of it in very real and visceral ways. They don't need an academic explanation. They understand it. They understand oppression. Our job as organizers is to help connect those oppressions into the larger, systemic problems, and then to really get them involved in the mass, bottom up grassroots solution.
Yeah, to train them to be their own organizers and build their own community power.
Get off our white horses, right? Stop advocating for people and seek to empower them to, speak for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the grassroots bottom-up organizing approach is really about. Empowering communities instead of looking at yourself as the hero, the savior. It's about us learning how to be our own heroes in our own communities, and then working together and cooperating to build a larger movement. But we're not telling people what to do. We're helping them organize their own communities to take the actions that make sense for them, because every community has their own problems and their own ways of needing to resolve those issues because of the unique circumstances that might be there. There is no one size fits all for organizing. There's also no one size fits all for the answer to capitalism. It all depends on the community. I've experienced some of these canvassing things too when I was out canvassing. So I wanted to share one thing that makes me very nervous. I was glad to hear Howie say this too, but I'm actually very introverted. I tend to not really like talking to people or being very social, although I can fake it for a while. I can mask for a while, especially because I got used to that doing teaching. So I'm a very confusing person, right? But I wanted to share that because I'm sure that there's people that'll see this that'll think the same thing. I'm an introvert and I don't feel comfortable talking to people, and I'm not sure if I can really do this. And I just want to remind you that you can do it, and it's actually not hard. It's not bad. You can do it, and you can actually enjoy it. You can actually have fun. In my personal experience, talking to people, doing canvassing, 1 in 50 or something like that might say, and then like close the door or whatever and not talk to you. Most people are perfectly friendly and they will at least listen to what you say politely. And even if they don't agree, say, okay, well, thanks for stopping by or whatever. But a lot of times you'll get engagement and you'll get people ask questions, who are you? Who's the Green Party? What's this for and all? And you can have very positive conversations. And that includes talking with Democrats and Republicans. Don't let that scare you. I think we're used to thinking of the politicians, the people that lead the parties. They're out to get us. They're out to get the Green Party and stuff. And regardless of what happens at the top level of the parties, that's not true for the average voters. The average voters are actually very frustrated by the Democratic and Republican parties. When I'm out canvassing, I have asked people before, what do you think is the biggest issue around here? And I've had both Democrats and Republicans tell me that they thought that corruption in their own party was the biggest problem. That they were sick of their own party, so to speak, not listening to them. And that's because they're not really in a party. They're not in a membership party. They're not in a party that actually wants to listen to them and help them organize. And so they're frustrated by that. So if you can talk to them, you can help change their minds and pull them into being organizers. Because they're sick of the way politics works today, just like Chris was saying. They're sick of that. So they might be a little bit cautious if they don't know you, but that's why it takes time to build that trust. And it's good to go and talk with them multiple times. The first time you might just ask them how they feel about things. And then if you go back, maybe the second time you go back and say, hey, the last time we talked, you mentioned that this was a concern. We have a candidate running for office. Would you mind signing a petition just so that they're on the ballot, just so that you could consider voting for them this November? It's pretty small ask to sign a petition, for example. And you can ask them for that. And if they're positive to that, maybe in the future you can ask them about, will you chip in $5 for the candidate, or do you want to come to one of our rallies or events or something? And you kind of slowly build them into it if they show that interest. And if they don't, that's okay too. It doesn't even mean that they hate the Green Party or anything. They just might not be that active. Maybe they don't have time right now. So, keep them at the appropriate ladder. But this is how you build trust, and you pull more people into the movement.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add real quick is, if you're saying, well, I've tried canvassing and I didn't like it, but what you did was canvass for a candidate, that's almost always, especially when we're talking about the Democrats and Republicans, the complete opposite of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? When you knock a door
especially for like federal candidates, it gets really heated. But when you're talking local issues, it's completely different.
Yeah, well, what I'm meaning is like, even when my local state house, someone knocking for like a state house or for city council around here, it's usually the candidate themselves who's knocking, so it's a little different. But you get something like state house, and the person knocking just wants to tell me about how their candidate is going to solve my problems.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's inverted when you're doing the way that the Republicans and Democrats run campaigns. They tell you what you should believe and who you should vote for. They're not listening and they're not asking, right? So that is a real. I know that in the Democrats' van in their database, I am listed as hostile, right? And I know that because I have friends who work for Democratic campaigns, and my wife's profile says hostile husband on it, right? And it's because they come and they tell me what I should believe, and I throw them off my porch. That is not a good way to go start having conversations to people, and it's going to get you more adversarial reactions as opposed to deep canvassing, which is more about a conversation. It's more about listening, right? And so instead of going and telling someone that they should believe something, which is very authoritarian in its nature, you're going and you're giving them an outlet to talk about things that are frustrating them in the community. And then as you build the relationship, you can start going, right?